This is the story of one of the darkest chapters in criminal history in late 19th century Texas, where religious fervor transformed into something far more sinister than anyone could have anticipated. In the summer of 1897, in the remote desert plains near what is now Presidio County, a Catholic priest named Father Miguel Santos Ramirez led his followers into a spiral of madness that would claim dozens of lives and leave survivors permanently scarred, both physically and mentally. The case remains one of the most disturbing examples of religious extremism in American frontier history, yet official records were systematically suppressed, buried beneath layers of ecclesiastical shame and territorial embarrassment. Before we begin this harrowing examination, I invite you to leave a like if you appreciate thoroughly researched historical true crime content. The events that unfolded in the makeshift settlement of Esperanza Nueva occurred during a particularly turbulent period in Texas history. The frontier was still largely untamed, with scattered communities of Mexican-American families, recent immigrants, and displaced indigenous peoples struggling to establish themselves in harsh desert conditions. The Catholic Church maintained minimal presence in these remote areas, often sending circuit priests to minister to isolated communities that might not see ordained clergy for months at a time. Father Ramirez had arrived in the region in early 1896, claiming to carry official documentation from the Diocese of San Antonio, though these papers would later prove to be either forged or obtained under false pretenses. According to baptismal records preserved in the Presidio County Historical Archive, Father Ramirez was approximately 52 years old when he established his mission at Esperanza Nueva. Contemporary descriptions from letters written by parishioners to relatives in San Antonio describe him as a tall, gaunt man with penetrating dark eyes and an unusually deep, resonant voice that seemed to carry supernatural authority. Maria Elena Vasquez, writing to her sister in July 1896, described the priest as a man touched by God's fire, whose very presence brings both comfort and unease, as though he sees truths that mortal eyes should not perceive. The settlement of Esperanza Nueva consisted of approximately 43 families, totaling nearly 200 souls according to territorial census records from 1896. These were primarily subsistence farmers, ranchers with small herds, and craftspeople who had been drawn to the area by promises of fertile land and mineral deposits. The community had been without regular religious services for over 14 months when Father Ramirez arrived, making his presence particularly welcome among the devoutly Catholic families who comprised the majority of residents. Initial reports suggest that Father Ramirez conducted conventional religious services for the first 8 months of his tenure. Church records, though fragmentary, indicate regular baptisms, marriages, and funeral rites performed according to standard Catholic doctrine. However, by February 1897, correspondence from community members began to reflect concerning changes in the priest's behavior and teachings. Eduardo Santos, the settlement's unofficial mayor, and no relation to the priest despite sharing a surname, wrote to territorial authorities expressing concern about strange sermons that speak of visions and revelations not found in Holy Scripture. The transformation appears to have begun with Father Ramirez, claiming to receive direct divine visions during his private prayers. According to witness accounts compiled by territorial investigator Captain James Morrison in September 1897, the priest initially described these visions as beautiful encounters with saints and angels. However, the content of his reported revelations quickly took on increasingly disturbing characteristics. Survivors would later testify that Father Ramirez claimed God had shown him the precise date of the Second Coming, which he calculated to be August 15, 1897, and that only those who demonstrated absolute faith through extreme sacrifice would achieve salvation. The concept of purification through blindness emerged in Father Ramirez's teachings around May 1897. Drawing from obscure interpretations of biblical passages about the blind seeing divine truth, the priest began preaching that physical sight was a barrier to spiritual enlightenment. According to notes preserved in the journal of Dr. William Henderson, who visited the settlement in June 1897 on his circuit rounds, Father Ramirez had begun conducting ceremonies of enlightenment, where volunteers would stare directly into the desert sun while reciting prayers, often for hours at a time. Dr. Henderson's journal, discovered in 1963 in the basement of the defunct Marfa General Hospital, provides crucial first-hand documentation of the deteriorating conditions at Esperanza Nueva. His entry, dated June 20, 1897, describes finding several community members suffering from severe solar retinopathy, with at least 12 individuals showing signs of permanent vision damage. When Henderson attempted to warn residents about the medical dangers of these practices, Father Ramirez reportedly accused him of being an agent of Satan sent to test the faithful. The situation escalated dramatically in July 1897 when Father Ramirez announced that his visions had revealed a specific ritual necessary for the community's salvation. According to survivor testimony compiled by Captain Morrison, the priest claimed that God had commanded him to lead the most faithful in a ceremony that would permanently remove the temptation of earthly sight, allowing them to see only divine truth for the remainder of their brief time on earth before the anticipated rapture. 47 residents of Esperanza Nueva participated in what survivors later described as the Ceremony of Divine Darkness on July 29, 1897. Contemporary accounts, preserved in the personal papers of Territorial Judge Marcus Fitzgerald, describe a ritual that began at dawn and continued throughout the day. Participants were led to a flat mesa, approximately 2 miles northeast of the settlement, where Father Ramirez had constructed what witnesses described as an altar surrounded by polished metal reflectors designed to concentrate and intensify sunlight. The ceremony involved participants taking turns approaching the altar, while Father Ramirez held their heads steady, forcing them to stare directly into the concentrated solar reflection while he recited prayers in Latin. Survivors reported that many participants screamed in agony as their retinas were seared by the intense light, but the priest commanded them to remain motionless, claiming their pain was evidence of Satan's influence being burned away from their souls. Rosa Martinez, one of only 7 survivors of the ceremony, provided detailed testimony to Captain Morrison in October 1897. Her account, recorded in territorial court documents, describes how participants who tried to turn away or close their eyes were physically restrained by other community members who had already undergone the ritual. Martinez reported that Father Ramirez appeared to be in a trance-like state throughout the ceremony, his own eyes completely white and sightless, suggesting he had previously subjected himself to the same process. The most disturbing aspect of survivor accounts involves descriptions of Father Ramirez's behavior after the mass blinding. According to multiple witnesses, the priest seemed to navigate the desert terrain with impossible accuracy, despite his obvious blindness, leading his equally sightless followers on nocturnal journeys to locations he claimed were revealed to him in visions. These expeditions, which occurred almost nightly throughout early August 1897, allegedly resulted in the discovery of previously unknown water sources and the unearthing of artifacts that survivors described as not made by human hands. Teresa Santos, Eduardo Santos's daughter and another ceremony survivor, reported that Father Ramirez's sermons during this period became increasingly incomprehensible, delivered in a mixture of Latin, Spanish, and what she described as words that seemed to come from no earthly language. Her testimony, preserved in the Santos family papers donated to the University of Texas archives in 1952, describes how the priest claimed to be receiving constant divine communications, often pausing mid-sentence to apparently listen to invisible voices before continuing with renewed intensity. The final tragedy occurred on August 14, 1897, just one day before Father Ramirez's predicted date for the Second Coming. According to survivor accounts, the priest announced that God had revealed the precise location where the faithful should await their ascension to heaven. Leading his 39 remaining followers, all of whom had been blinded in various ceremonies throughout the summer, Father Ramirez guided them to a remote canyon approximately 15 miles southeast of Esperanza Nueva. Captain Morrison's official report, filed with territorial authorities on September 2, 1897, describes the discovery of the canyon site on August 21st. The bodies of 39 adults and children were found arranged in precise circular patterns around natural rock formations. Medical examination revealed that most had died from exposure and dehydration, though several showed evidence of additional trauma that Morrison's report diplomatically described as inconsistent with natural causes. Father Ramirez's body was never found at the canyon site, despite extensive searches conducted by territorial rangers and local volunteers. The only trace of his presence was his distinctive silver crucifix, found embedded in a rock face at a height that would have been impossible to reach without climbing equipment. More puzzling was the condition of the rock surrounding the crucifix, which showed signs of intense heat exposure despite the absence of any fire damage in the immediate area. The 7 survivors of the Esperanza Nueva incident were eventually relocated to San Antonio, where they lived under the care of the Catholic Church until their deaths decades later. None ever fully recovered their sight, and all reported continuing to experience what they described as visions, similar to those claimed by Father Ramirez. Church records indicate that these survivors were kept in virtual seclusion, with strict instructions that they were not to discuss their experiences with anyone outside of approved ecclesiastical authorities. The official territorial investigation concluded that Father Ramirez was a mentally unstable impostor who had manipulated vulnerable frontier families through exploitation of their religious beliefs. However, several aspects of the case remained unexplained in Captain Morrison's final report. The fake documentation that had apparently established Father Ramirez's credentials was never located, despite extensive inquiries with the Diocese of San Antonio and other regional church authorities. More troubling was the complete absence of any historical record of Miguel Santos Ramirez prior to his arrival at Esperanza Nueva, as if he had materialized from nowhere in early 1896. Dr. Henderson's medical notes provide additional mysteries that the official investigation failed to adequately address. His examination of early ceremony participants revealed patterns of eye damage that were inconsistent with simple solar exposure. The damage appeared to follow specific anatomical pathways that Dr. Henderson noted were suggestive of deliberate surgical intervention rather than thermal injury. His attempts to study these unusual injuries were cut short when territorial authorities confiscated his medical records and ordered him to cease all communication regarding the Esperanza Nueva incident. This is the story of 47 people who entered a desert canyon in August 1897 seeking salvation. Only 7 returned, forever changed by what they witnessed. The others disappeared into the unforgiving Texas wilderness, following a blind priest whose visions may have revealed truths too terrible for mortal comprehension. Even today, more than a century later, their fate continues to cast shadows across the remote corners of Presidio County, where some say Father Ramirez still wanders the desert, searching for new followers to share his nightmarish enlightenment. This is the story of one of the darkest chapters in criminal history in the remote Texas borderlands of 1897. Before I begin, I invite you to leave a like and prepare yourself for a journey into documented events that challenge our understanding of religious devotion, psychological manipulation, and the thin line between salvation and damnation. The year 1897 found the small settlement of Esperanza Valley nestled in the harsh desert landscape of southwestern Texas, approximately 40 miles from the Mexican border. This isolated community of barely 200 souls existed in a world unto itself, connected to civilization by a single dusty trail that wound through treacherous canyon passages and unforgiving scrubland. The settlement had been established 12 years earlier by Mexican-American families seeking refuge from the violent upheavals that periodically swept through the borderlands. Into this remote outpost came Father Miguel Ramirez in the spring of 1897, arriving with credentials from the Diocese of San Antonio and carrying letters of introduction from prominent church officials. According to parish records preserved in the Archdiocese of San Antonio, Father Ramirez was 54 years old, born in Guadalajara, and had served congregations throughout northern Mexico and southern Texas for over 2 decades. The residents of Esperanza Valley welcomed him with the desperate gratitude of people who had been without spiritual guidance for nearly 3 years. What the townspeople could not have known was that Father Ramirez would lead 43 of their neighbors into the desert wilderness on a pilgrimage of purification, promising them visions of the divine and direct communion with the Sacred Heart of Christ. Only 7 individuals would return from that journey, their eyes sealed shut with heated metal, their minds shattered by experiences they could never fully articulate. The others simply vanished into the vast desert expanse, leaving behind only scattered belongings, fragments of religious texts, and testimonies so disturbing that local authorities initially refused to document them officially. Documents from the Bexar County Historical Archive reveal that Father Ramirez arrived in Esperanza Valley claiming to possess a divine revelation received during a 40-day fast in the caves of the Sierra Madre. According to witness statements collected by Sheriff Thomas Mackenzie, in June 1897, Ramirez spoke of experiencing visions in which Christ himself had appeared, bearing wounds that wept tears of liquid gold. These visions, Ramirez proclaimed, had revealed to him the location of a sacred site in the desert where the faithful could achieve immediate salvation through ritual purification and spiritual communion. Maria Esperanza Gutierrez, whose testimony was recorded by the traveling circuit judge William Harrison on June 15, 1897, described Father Ramirez as possessing an otherworldly charisma that seemed to grow stronger with each passing week. According to her account, preserved in the Harrison County Legal Archives, the priest's sermons became increasingly focused on the inadequacy of traditional worship and the necessity of seeking direct divine contact through extreme devotion and sacrifice. The records indicate that Father Ramirez gradually assembled his most devoted followers, promising them participation in a sacred pilgrimage that would culminate in miraculous visions and spiritual transformation. Among those who volunteered were some of Esperanza Valley's most respected citizens, including Antonio Valdez, the settlement's unofficial leader, and Dr. Elena Morales, a skilled curandera whose healing practices had sustained the community through numerous crises. On May 23, 1897, according to the Journal of Merchant Samuel Cordova, Father Ramirez led his 43 followers into the desert, carrying with them minimal supplies but abundant faith in their spiritual guide's promises. Cordova's account, discovered in 1963 by researcher Dr. James Whitfield of the University of Texas, describes the departure as resembling a religious procession, with participants singing hymns and carrying handmade banners depicting scenes from the Passion of Christ. The pilgrimage was scheduled to last 7 days, during which Father Ramirez promised his followers would experience progressive spiritual revelations, culminating in direct divine visions. According to his teachings, as recorded in fragments of his handwritten notes found years later, participants would undergo a process of spiritual purification that would cleanse their earthly vision and replace it with sacred sight. For 4 days, no word came from the pilgrimage party. On the 5th day, residents of Esperanza Valley reported seeing strange lights flickering in the desert distance, accompanied by sounds that witnesses described as resembling human voices raised in either ecstatic worship or desperate screaming. The acoustic properties of the desert landscape made it impossible to determine the exact source or nature of these phenomena. Sheriff Mackenzie's official report, filed with the Texas Rangers on June 18, 1897, details the return of 7 individuals to Esperanza Valley on May 30th, exactly 1 week after the pilgrimage's departure. These survivors presented a horrifying spectacle that traumatized the entire settlement. Each returnee's eyes had been deliberately sealed shut using what medical examination later determined to be heated metal implements, creating permanent scarring that extended from the eyebrows to the cheekbones. Dr. Augustus Sinclair, the territorial medical examiner who traveled from El Paso to examine the survivors, documented in his report of June 5, 1897, that the eye sealing procedure had been performed with ritualistic precision. The scarring pattern suggested the use of specifically designed tools, heated to extreme temperatures, and applied with surgical care to ensure the complete sealing of the eye sockets while minimizing the risk of fatal infection. More disturbing than their physical condition was the survivors' psychological state. According to Dr. Sinclair's psychiatric evaluation, preserved in the El Paso Medical Society archives, Each individual exhibited symptoms of profound trauma, coupled with expressions of religious ecstasy that bordered on mania. When questioned about their experiences, the survivors spoke in fragmented, often contradictory terms about witnessing miraculous visions that were too sacred and terrible for human comprehension. Rosa Martinez, identified in the medical records as a 32-year-old mother of 4, repeatedly claimed to have seen the true face of divine love burning like 1,000 suns. Her testimony, recorded on multiple occasions, included descriptions of Father Ramirez undergoing a physical transformation during the pilgrimage's climactic ceremony, his human features allegedly dissolving and reforming into something that defied natural description. Similar accounts emerged from the other survivors, each describing Father Ramirez's apparent metamorphosis from human priest to something that transcended ordinary physical existence. Francisco Herrera, a 45-year-old carpenter, testified that he had witnessed the priest's eyes become windows into the eternal fire of salvation, emanating light so intense that looking upon them directly caused immediate blindness. According to the survivors' collective testimony, compiled by Circuit Judge Harrison during a 3-day hearing in June 1897, Father Ramirez had led the pilgrimage to a natural amphitheater deep in the desert, surrounded by towering rock formations that created perfect acoustic conditions. Within this natural cathedral, the priest had established what he called the sacred circle of purification, arranging his followers in concentric rings around a central altar, constructed from desert stones. The ceremony itself, as described by survivor accounts preserved in the Esperanza Valley Community Archive, began at sunset on the pilgrimage's final day. Father Ramirez allegedly commenced by reading from religious texts that none of the participants recognized, speaking in languages that seemed to combine Latin, Spanish, and dialects that predated European colonization. As the ritual progressed, witnesses reported that the priest's voice began to harmonize with itself, as though multiple speakers were reciting the sacred word simultaneously. Maria Santos, whose testimony was recorded by stenographer Catherine Walsh on June 12, 1897, described experiencing visions that began as traditional religious imagery, but gradually transformed into something far more disturbing. According to her account, she initially saw familiar scenes from Christian iconography, including the crucifixion and resurrection. However, these images progressively distorted, with Christ's suffering face becoming something alien and predatory, his wounds opening into doorways through which inhuman entities emerged. The survivors unanimously reported that Father Ramirez had promised them that accepting blindness would grant them permanent spiritual vision, allowing them to perceive divine truth without the contamination of earthly sight. The eye-sealing procedure was presented as the ultimate act of faith, a voluntary sacrifice that would transform them into living saints capable of serving as intermediaries between the human and divine realms. Dr. Sinclair's medical report noted that the survivors showed no signs of having been physically restrained during the blinding procedure. Tissue analysis suggested they had remained motionless during the application of the heated metal instruments, indicating either voluntary submission or some form of psychological control that rendered them incapable of resistance. This finding particularly disturbed the medical examiner, who noted in his personal journal that the precision and uniformity of the scarring suggested extensive practice or supernatural guidance. The fate of the remaining 36 pilgrimage participants remained a complete mystery. Extensive search parties organized by Sheriff Mackenzie, including experienced desert trackers and local hunters familiar with the terrain, found no trace of the missing individuals. The search area encompassed over 200 square miles of desert landscape, including numerous caves, ravines, and hidden valleys where a large group might conceivably take shelter. What the searchers did discover proved equally disturbing. At the natural amphitheater described by the survivors, investigators found evidence of a large gathering, including the remains of multiple campfires, scattered personal belongings, and fragments of religious texts written in an unknown script. Most unsettling were the numerous metal implements found buried in the sand, tools that appeared specifically designed for the eye-sealing procedure observed on the survivors. Sheriff Mackenzie's investigative team also documented strange markings carved into the rock walls surrounding the amphitheater. These symbols, photographed by Deputy Marshal Robert Chen using the latest photographic equipment available in 1897, appeared to combine Christian iconography with pre-Columbian designs that predated Spanish colonization by centuries. Dr. Harold Pemberton, an archaeologist from the Smithsonian Institution who examined the photographs in 1898, concluded that the symbols represented a syncretic religious system that merged multiple spiritual traditions in ways that violated Orthodox Christian doctrine. The investigation's most disturbing discovery came on July 4, 1897, when search parties found a series of shallow graves approximately 5 miles from the ceremonial site. These graves, according to the official excavation report filed by Deputy Marshal Chen, contained partial human remains that showed evidence of ritualistic treatment. The bodies had been systematically dismembered, with specific organs removed and arranged in patterns that suggested religious significance. Forensic analysis conducted by Dr. Sinclair determined that the remains belonged to at least 12 individuals, though the incomplete nature of the evidence made exact identification impossible. More troubling was the condition of the skeletal material, which showed signs of exposure to extreme heat that could not be explained by natural desert conditions or conventional cremation methods. The mystery deepened when several survivors began experiencing what Dr. Sinclair classified as post-traumatic religious episodes during their recovery period. These incidents, documented in medical reports from July through September 1897, involved the survivors claiming to receive continued communications from Father Ramirez, despite his apparent disappearance into the desert. During these episodes, witnesses reported that the survivors would speak in voices that did not match their normal vocal patterns, delivering messages that claimed to originate from their former spiritual guide. Local residents reported that these communications often contained specific information about events occurring in distant locations, details that the isolated survivors could not possibly have known through conventional means. Father Patrick O'Malley, who arrived from San Antonio to provide spiritual counseling to the survivors, documented several instances where these alleged messages proved accurate when later verified through official channels. The case attracted attention from religious authorities throughout the southwestern United States and northern Mexico. Bishop Francisco Martinez of the Diocese of San Antonio launched an official investigation into Father Ramirez's credentials and background, uncovering disturbing inconsistencies in the documentation that had originally validated his ecclesiastical standing. According to the bishop's report, filed with Vatican authorities in August 1897, no record existed of Miguel Ramirez having served in any official church capacity within the previous decade. This is the story of one of the darkest chapters in criminal history that continues to challenge our understanding of religious manipulation, psychological control, and the dangerous intersection of spiritual devotion and human vulnerability in the isolated communities of the American frontier. Dr. Margaret Sullivan arrived in Salvation Ridge during the spring of 1978. Drawn by fragmentary references she discovered in the archives of the University of Texas at Austin. Sullivan, a respected professor of American religious history, had been researching 19th-century religious movements when she encountered a peculiar gap in the historical record. Official documents from Salvation Ridge simply stopped appearing in county records after December 1897, resuming only in late 1898 with new officials and no explanation for the transition. Sullivan's initial research focused on Father Miguel Ramirez himself. According to baptismal records from the Diocese of San Antonio, Ramirez had been ordained in 1863 and served various parishes throughout South Texas before disappearing from official church records in 1895. Church correspondence, preserved in the diocesan archives, revealed growing concerns about Ramirez's unorthodox interpretations of Scripture and disturbing reports from parishioners regarding his private counseling sessions. In a letter dated March 15, 1895, Bishop Samuel Morrison wrote to his superiors in Baltimore, "Father Ramirez has developed an unhealthy obsession with apocalyptic visions and claims to receive direct communications from divine sources. Several parishioners have complained of strange rituals he performs in private, involving prolonged staring exercises, he calls purification of sight. I fear his mental state has deteriorated beyond our ability to provide proper guidance. Sullivan discovered that Ramirez had been quietly removed from his official position, but had never formally been defrocked. He simply vanished from church records, only to resurface 2 years later in the remote settlement of Salvation Ridge, where he established what he called the Church of Eternal Light. The settlement itself had been founded by German immigrants in 1889, but by 1897 it consisted primarily of desperate families seeking refuge from economic hardship and religious persecution. The academic's investigation led her to the basement archives of the Bexar County Historical Society, where she made her most significant discovery. Hidden within a collection of miscellaneous documents was a leather-bound journal belonging to Dr. Henry Whitmore, the physician who had examined the survivors immediately after the incident. Unlike his official medical reports, which Sullivan had already reviewed, this personal journal contained detailed observations that painted a far more disturbing picture. Whitmore's journal, dated December 23, 1897, described his first encounter with the survivors. "I have served as a medical practitioner for 23 years, but nothing in my experience prepared me for what I witnessed today. The 7 individuals brought to my clinic displayed symptoms unlike any form of hysteria or trauma I have previously encountered. Their eyes, though physically intact, showed signs of severe inflammation consistent with prolonged exposure to intense light, yet they claimed to have been in darkness for days." The physician's notes became increasingly alarmed as his examination continued. Most disturbing is their unanimous account of Father Ramirez's transformation during what they call the final revelation. All 7 describe identical visions of the priest's eyes becoming sources of overwhelming light, so brilliant that looking directly at him became impossible. Yet they also claim that once blinded by this light, they could see things that should not exist. Figures moving in the shadows, messages written in languages they did not recognize, and most troubling, visions of their own deaths occurring simultaneously in multiple ways. Dr. Whitmore documented specific details that had been omitted from official reports. Maria Santos, one of the survivors, had described seeing Father Ramirez standing at the altar of their makeshift church, his eyes glowing with what she called the fire of angels. According to her account, Ramirez had been preaching for 3 days straight without pause, his voice growing stronger rather than weaker with time. The congregation, numbering 43 souls including children, had been unable to leave the building, though none could explain why the doors would not open, despite appearing unlocked. Thomas Weber, another survivor, provided even more disturbing testimony recorded in Whitmore's private notes. Weber claimed that on the 2nd day, several congregation members had approached Father Ramirez to express concerns about the prolonged service. According to Weber's account, these individuals had looked directly into the priest's eyes and had immediately fallen to their knees, screaming about visions of hell and damnation. They then began clawing at their own eyes, begging to be blinded, so they would no longer have to see what Ramirez was showing them. Sullivan's research revealed that Dr. Whitmore had attempted to follow up with the survivors over the following months, but his journal entries showed growing frustration and fear. By June 1898, 6 of the 7 survivors had died under mysterious circumstances. The causes of death varied: 2 apparent suicides, 3 sudden heart failures, and 1 case of what Whitmore described as complete catatonia resulting in death by starvation. Only Maria Santos remained alive, but her mental state had deteriorated to the point where she could no longer provide coherent testimony. The academic's investigation took an unexpected turn when she located living descendants of the survivors. Elena Santos Martinez, Maria's granddaughter, agreed to meet with Sullivan at a diner in nearby Fredericksburg. Elena revealed that her grandmother had lived until 1943, spending her final decades in the care of family members who struggled to understand her condition. "Abuela would wake up screaming almost every night," Elena told Sullivan. "She would cover her eyes and beg God to take away her sight, saying she could still see things that weren't meant for human eyes. But the strangest thing was that she would draw these incredibly detailed pictures while blindfolded. Beautiful, terrifying images of angels and demons locked in battle. The doctors said it was impossible, but we all saw her do it. Elena provided Sullivan with several of these drawings, which the academic later submitted for analysis at the University of Texas. Art historians confirmed that the drawings displayed techniques and perspectives that would have been impossible for someone of Maria Santos's limited education to produce, especially while blindfolded. More troubling, radiocarbon dating of the paper and ink suggested that some drawings had been created decades before Maria's birth, though Eleanor insisted she had witnessed her grandmother creating them. Sullivan's research expanded to include geological surveys of the Salvation Ridge area. She discovered that the region sat above a complex network of limestone caves, many of which remained unexplored. Early Spanish explorers had noted unusual light phenomena in the area, describing stars that fell to earth and continued burning beneath the ground. Indigenous peoples of the region, according to ethnographic studies, had considered the area sacred but dangerous, believing it to be a place where the barrier between worlds was thin. During the summer of 1979, Sullivan organized an archaeological expedition to the ruins of the settlement. Using ground-penetrating radar, her team located the remains of the church where the final gathering had occurred. Excavation revealed that the building's foundation had been constructed directly over a natural cave opening. More significantly, they discovered evidence of much older construction beneath the 1897 church, stone arrangements that predated European settlement by centuries. The excavation team made their most significant discovery in the cave system beneath the church. Deep within the limestone passages, they found a chamber containing what appeared to be an ancient altar, surrounded by carved symbols that matched those Maria Santos had drawn in her blindfolded sketches. The chamber showed signs of recent use, with burned candles and fresh offerings that couldn't be explained by the site's presumed abandonment nearly a century earlier. Dr. Sullivan's final journal entry, discovered after her disappearance, described her decision to spend a night alone in the cave chamber. "I must understand what Father Ramirez experienced in this place. The symbols on the walls seem to shift and change when viewed in candlelight, forming patterns that suggest meanings just beyond comprehension. I feel drawn to stare deeper into these carvings, to allow my eyes to adjust fully to their hidden messages. Perhaps if I can achieve the same state of vision that Ramirez attained, I can finally understand what happened to those 43 souls." Sullivan vanished on October 13, 1979. Her research materials were found scattered throughout the cave system, along with dozens of new drawings created in the same style as Maria Santos's blindfolded artwork. These drawings depicted scenes of the 1897 gathering with impossible detail, as if Sullivan had witnessed the events firsthand. Most disturbing, the final drawings showed Sullivan herself standing at the ancient altar, her eyes blazing with the same supernatural light that survivors had attributed to Father Ramirez. In the decades following Sullivan's disappearance, the Salvation Ridge area has continued to generate reports that suggest the dark legacy of Father Ramirez remains active. Texas Department of Parks and Wildlife Rangers have documented numerous incidents involving hikers and campers who report encountering a figure matching Ramirez's description in the vicinity of the ruins. These witnesses describe a man in clerical robes whose eyes emit an unnatural light, and who attempts to lead people toward the underground chambers. Ranger Patricia Hoffman filed a particularly detailed report in 1987 after encountering 3 college students who had become lost near the ruins. "I found them wandering in circles, all 3 claiming they had been following a priest who promised to show them the true light of salvation. They had been missing for 4 days but insisted they had only been walking for a few hours. Most concerning, all 3 showed signs of severe eye strain and kept trying to cover their faces when exposed to normal daylight. They claimed the priest's eyes were so bright they could see them even with their own eyes closed." Modern technology has provided new dimensions to the mystery. In 1995, a team from the University of Texas Paranormal Research Division installed motion-activated cameras throughout the cave system. Over a 6-month period, the cameras recorded dozens of instances of unexplained light phenomena, including several sequences showing a human figure moving through the chambers, despite no one having entered the sealed site. More troubling, analysis of the video footage revealed that the cameras had recorded far more activity than their memory cards should have been able to store. Digital forensics experts determined that the recordings contained multiple layers of imagery, as if the same events were being captured from several different time periods simultaneously. Some footage appeared to show the original 1897 gathering occurring in the same space as modern-day incidents, with both time periods visible in a single frame. Dr. James Morrison, no relation to the 19th century bishop, led the most recent academic investigation of the site in 2003. Morrison, a professor of religious psychology at Rice University, approached the case from the perspective of understanding how religious fervor could produce mass hallucinations. His research took an unexpected turn when he began experiencing what he described as compulsive visual phenomena while reviewing Sullivan's materials. Morrison's research notes, published posthumously after his death in 2004, described increasingly vivid dreams in which he found himself present at Father Ramirez's final sermon. I can see every detail of that December night in 1897. The congregation's faces illuminated by candles that burn with colors I cannot name. Father Ramirez at the altar, his eyes becoming windows to something beyond human understanding. I watch as 43 people willingly surrender their sight to glimpse what he promises lies beyond the veil of ordinary vision. But I also see the price of that revelation, the knowledge that drives them to madness and death. The academic's final report concluded that the Salvation Ridge incident represented a case of collective religious psychosis, but his private notes revealed a different understanding. Morrison had become convinced that Father Ramirez had discovered something in those caves that genuinely transcended normal human perception, and that the price of this revelation was the destruction of those who witnessed it. Today, the ruins of Salvation Ridge remain officially closed to the public, but the isolation of the site makes enforcement difficult. Local law enforcement continues to file reports of missing persons cases in the area, often involving individuals who have read about the historical incident and sought to investigate the site personally. These missing persons are sometimes found days or weeks later, wandering far from the ruins with no memory of their experiences, but displaying the same symptoms of light sensitivity that characterized the original survivors. The pattern established in 1897 appears to continue unbroken. People drawn by curiosity or academic interest disappear into the cave system beneath the ruined church, only to emerge changed or not at all. Those who return speak of visions that defy description, and of a presence that continues to offer the same promise Father Ramirez made to his congregation, the chance to see beyond the limitations of ordinary human sight. Perhaps most unsettling are recent reports from commercial pilots flying over the region. Several have reported seeing lights emanating from the ground near the ruins, lights that appear to pulse in patterns that create involuntary responses in those who observe them. The Federal Aviation Administration has issued advisories recommending that aircraft avoid flying directly over the area during nighttime hours, though the official explanation cites unusual magnetic interference, rather than the more disturbing reality documented by pilots who have experienced the phenomenon firsthand. 43 people entered that makeshift church in December 1897, seeking salvation through Father Ramirez's promised visions. Only 7 emerged with their sanity intact, and even they carried the mark of what they had witnessed until their deaths. The others remain in those limestone chambers, their fate as mysterious today as it was over a century ago. But if the reports of modern witnesses are to be believed, they are not alone in the darkness. They have been joined by every seeker who has since accepted Father Ramirez's eternal invitation to see the world as it truly exists, beyond the comfortable blindness of ordinary human perception.